welcome Bailey. Thank you, Bailey.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I want to just tell you I'm thrilled to be here to speak with you tonight. I've learned a lot about the Aquatic Academy recently, and I'm really thrilled that you asked me to talk about the integration of art and science to enhance environmental communication. My name is Aileen Buckley. I'm a professional cartographer. I work at a company called Esri. And when I tell people that I'm a cartographer, often they'll say, "Well, what's a cartographer?" And I'll say, "I make maps." And sometimes they'll say, "Well, hasn't everything already been mapped?" And I'll say, "No, absolutely not." And so that's what I'd like to talk to you about tonight, is the things that we map and how we map them. And I hope what you'll see is that in the process of my presentation, that you'll see that cartography is exactly aligned with the title of your course, because cartography is the integration of art and science for environmental communication. So let me start with the definition of cartography by the International Cartographic Association. It's the discipline dealing with the art, science, and technology of making and using maps. And this technology is where my company comes in, because I work for Esri. It stands for Environmental Systems Research Institute, and they are the world-leading company in the development and application of geographic information systems software. GIS, Geographic Information Systems, is used to collect, integrate, manage, visualize, and apply geographic information. And it's used in all sorts of disciplines. And the company's owner, Jack Dangerman, really recognizes the importance that maps have in this integration of geographic and environmental knowledge. He says GIS condenses down all the data and our information and our knowledge and our science into a kind of language that we can easily understand, maps. In a foreword to a book that I worked on recently with some colleagues called Map Use, Jack wrote this about the steps that are used in making a map. And I want to share them with you because I think you'll see through my presentation that the steps will represent themselves. First, we must be willing to think of ourselves as being separate from our surroundings. Second, we must be willing to deconstruct the environment into constituent parts that we then classify and label. Third, we must be able to gather meaningful and accurate raw data, we do love data, about the labeled features, attributes, and phenomena that we have identified. Fourth, we must have the skill and the capacity to process those data analytically, to draw out essential characteristics. Fifth, we must have the capability and talent to manipulate and display the results graphically in a way that reveals something interesting or useful about the mapped environment. And I want to illustrate this process of map making for you with an example from a colleague of mine at the National Geographic Society. Martin Gamache and a number of other people were involved in mapping the world's largest cave. It's called Hang Son Doong, and it's in Vietnam. And so let me show you through illustration what this process of map making involves. This is the final map, and in order to come up with this final map, they first started with any existing maps. And then they went back to the cave and they resurveyed to both verify the information that they had on the maps and to collect new information. That information was collected digitally, and it was stored in a method that we can use to create maps from. So it was then modeled to create a 3D surface. That was then projected into map space, so it was in a coordinate system that we could understand and work with. And then that was also integrated with the above surface terrain. Information that relates to the development of the cave, such as these very large sinkholes, was also gathered, and that was integrated with model. So now you can see that these sinkholes have been added to the terrain surface. Then that terrain surface was rendered more artistically, and so a scale was added. Additional notes for the map reader were added, the scale bar so people could, or the scale that relates to the height of the elevation of that subterranean feature were added. And on the final page layout, 3 additional maps were included, an additional graphic was included, additional explanatory text was included, and everything was cleaned up to work together. So that's what goes into making a map. Now, not all maps are quite as complex as this one, and in some cases we already have data, but always the map maker is working from the beginning, thinking about the data all the way through to a final product that communicates something to the map reader. And I will say at this point that the maps that I'm going to show you really were examples that I drew from the set of maps, a very, very large set of maps, that are intended to communicate something that we've learned about the environment to the map reader. Some maps are also created to allow us to explore data, and in those cases, it's a bit of a different process. We're not refining and trying to come up with the way that we want to communicate the message, because we're really in an exploratory mode instead. I'm going to show you different examples now, and I'm going to start with an example that came from a book that I worked on about a decade ago when I was a professor at University of Oregon, and it was the Atlas of Oregon, which after it was in print version, then we went to a digital version and we were able to add interactivity and animation. But the first map in the book is this one. It's called Oregon in the World. And I think it's one of the most striking maps that I've seen. There are a couple of things to me that really make this map work as an aesthetic, with an aesthetic appeal to the readers. One is the sphericity, the repeated sphericity. And secondly is the beautiful choice of colors. Now let me talk first about the sphericity. The way that we can add this kind of a display to a map is through what's called a map projection. A map projection, if we go back to the book again, Map Use, is a way of transforming mathematically the spherical world onto a flat surface. It could be a piece of paper, it could be a computer screen. But it's a mathematical transformation. And this is one of the things that's common to all maps, and it's one of the very scientific parts of maps. But it's also one of the things that causes some of the most confusion for both map makers and map readers. However, if you don't understand something about map projections, it's likely that you won't be able to understand some maps, and it's also likely that some map makers are going to be able to mislead you with the maps that they make. Let's go back to the second part that was interesting about that previous map, which was the colors. The colors are a technique that cartographers call hypsometric tinting. Hypsometry is the elevation, and the colors that are chosen for the map relate to different elevation ranges, often also giving an impression of what you would see on the landscape. So in this map, we're using dark bluish greens for verdant valleys, and we're transitioning then smoothly up to lighter greens, lighter browns for areas that might be just at the tree line area, into darker browns for areas above a tree line, and then into white snow-capped peaks for the highest elevations. And this works really well. So we apply it in a lot of cases to a lot of different maps. This is a map that I created with John Kimmerly. He was the lead author on that Map Use book. He was also my professor at Oregon State University. And this is a world elevation map that we created using that technique of hypsometric tinting. Now the advantage of this technique is that you can tell for any area that has the same color, other areas that are at the same elevation. So it works really well for that. But there are a couple problems. One is that, well, there is a major problem, and that is that the other use of this hypsometric tint is to try and give you an impression of what you would see on the landscape. Well, using this technique on a world map, we're going to have the lowest elevations in green. And we're going to give the impression that Australia is a green verdant area when it's a desert. And to bring it more closely to home, This area in green here is Death Valley, the lowest, driest, hottest part of the United States, in fact, North America, and it's being shown as something that you would probably interpret as a green lush area. So to get over this problem, a couple other friends, Tom Patterson, who's at the National Park Service, and Bernie Yenny, who's now at Oregon State University, came up with a technique called cross-blended hypsometric tinting. And using this technique, they can change the tints that are used in a location based on what you would sort of intend to see in those locations. So cold, humid areas will look different from arid areas, will look different from warm, humid areas, and will look different from polar areas. And I just want to read a quote that they wrote about this technique so you can hear in their own words how this works. On a world map of cross-blended hypsometric tints, for example, interior Australia is dusty brown, western Siberia is boreal forest green, the Amazon basin is jungle green, and Greenland is icy blue-gray. Now what these guys did was they took those data and their mapped interpretation of those data and put them on a website so you can download them for free and bring them into any illustration or geographic information software and make your own maps. And they will be beautiful from the get-go and accurate, at least in terms of what is meant to be seen as land cover. So this is a screenshot of our software with their data being pulled in to create a base map that you could lay other information on top of. Now this hypsometric tinting technique can be used for other areas. For example, bathymetric data. And this is a map that Tom, again, from National Park Service, put together to map the seafloor area around Hawaii. But this is not simply a map that has the application of color. Tom did a whole lot more than that. He really researched the data, and some of it was newly compiled data that somebody had never really compiled for mapping purposes before. And he integrated that with any information he could find about what was known already about that seafloor. And then he tried very carefully to communicate that information to people who were reading the map. So he has little notes that you can follow, and hopefully his mapping technique also made some of these features really prominently stand out for you. And part of the way he did that was, again, through the map projection. This map projection is called a plan oblique map projection. And again, I'm going to read a little bit about what he says about that projection. The plan oblique map projection, when it's used, is used so that landforms shown realistically in side view have an illustrative quality that appeals to readers. Now, can you sort of see that you're not looking straight down on this map, you're looking at it sort of from the side? This is a technique that he borrowed from some of the masters who were drawing maps by hand back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he was able, with his friend Bernie Yenny again, to come up with a mathematical transformation of elevation data that captures that side view angle and really gives the surface this 3D view, even though it's still on a 2D surface. And so on his final map, you can see these seamounts and things down here that are sort of look like, you know, on the old maps we call them hill signs, the upside down V's that you used to draw on your maps when you were a kid. It's a much more accurate and a much more realistic representation, but it's the same kind of idea. But this other thing about this map, I hope you'll see, is an example of one of those places where when people ask me, haven't we mapped everything already? Well, the answer is no. We haven't really constructed a map this beautiful and this communicative about this area of the world before. So there are lots of other places like this as well. You can imagine almost all of the ocean floor. Now, I'm going to switch a little bit at this point and talk about a different type of map. What you've seen so far are mostly maps that really look like a representation of the physical environment. And now I'm going to talk about what we call thematic maps. Thematic maps are focused on a particular theme, and other features that don't relate to that theme, background information, base geographic information, is generally left off so that you're not drawing your attention away from the theme of interest on the map. So let's start with this map that was constructed by a colleague who's at the Oregon Department of Geology and Mines. His name is Daniel Coe. And for this map, he used what's called light detection, LIDAR, light detection and, I use it all the time too, so how come I can't remember what it is? Light detection and ranging data. And these data are simply elevation data, but they're extremely high resolution. So what he did was take the LIDAR data and he reset the 0 value not to be sea level, or in this case, where the water meets the land. In this case, he used the 0 value as the lowest possible value in the data set. And from that, he then applied this spectacular set of blue tints to the elevation values. It's the same as hypsometric tinting, but what's incredible about his technique is that it allows you to find something that we couldn't previously see, the historic river channels. There they are. I mean, it seems plain as day, right? But when the landscape is covered with trees and human influences, they're not as apparent. And using the simple technique, but very high resolution data, and thinking it through, he was able to come up with this very wonderful view of something we hadn't previously seen. Now, speaking of things we haven't previously seen, here's another great example, I think. This was done by John Nelson at IDD Solutions. He's not a friend, but I want to make him a friend because I love his work. And as I said, part of my job is to uncover mapping techniques that people have used and then replicate them and try to learn from them. So that's what I do. And I'm working on a map that's very similar to this one now. Now this is a map of the earthquake since 1898. He got all those point features and he was able to map the magnitude of those features. But he didn't just map the points. Using a technique called interpolation, which is a geographic analytical technique, he created something called a density surface. And the density is the density of earthquakes of different magnitudes in those locations. And this is important because if he were simply to put point symbols on the map for each location, and then maybe color the points by magnitude, there are so many of them laying on top of each other that the only one you would see is the one on top. So what he needs to do is come up with a technique that summarizes what's happening within areas. And you can see, I think, a beautiful representation of a density surface. And then I think what he did is actually construct 3 or 4 density surfaces and overlay them with transparency. So a beautiful representation. He did the same technique on this map of hurricanes, but this map is also unique for another property, and that is the map projection. If you look, you will see in the center, Antarctica. This is South America, and then over here is Africa, and then Asia. So what you're seeing with this map projection, which is called a planar projection, centered on the South Pole, is you're seeing 2 bands of hurricanes, one in the southern hemisphere, divided by an area that's a void around the equator, and then there's another band of hurricanes in the northern hemisphere. So these are the southern hemispheres tracking to the east from the east side of Africa. These are the northern hemisphere hurricanes tracking to the west from the west side of Africa, all the way over to Southeast Asia, with a break for the landmass of Central America. And that distribution would be very difficult to see on a map with any other map projection. He used the same technique to show us tornado tracks. Now, if we had simply mapped the location, the point symbols for each of the locations that was recorded, you wouldn't see the tracking. So this is another great example of that technique when he used it. And finally, he used the technique, probably not finally, I think he's probably used it on some other maps too, but this map is another great example, and this is major fires. And on this map, what he's doing is actually relating the intensity of fire with the output in megawatts of nuclear power plants so that you can tell what kind of intense heat is coming out of those areas that are on fire. It's amazing, I think. Again, a really great example, I think, of the combination of art and science. Now let's switch to something that has to do with human geography instead of physical geography. What we're looking at here is a map that was put together by folks, really talented folks at the New York Times. And what it shows us is racial and ethnic diversity in New York City. And they're using a technique called pointillism, which if you know about art and you know Seurat and, let's get the next guy's name mixed up a little bit. Signac? They developed this as an extension to Impressionism, but we're using the technique here to show how mixed the neighborhoods are in New York City. Now back in New York City again, we're focusing this time on Hurricane Sandy, and we're looking at a map again by John Nelson, IDD Solutions, in which he was trying to show where the storm surge from Hurricane Sandy was modeled to reach and where it actually did reach. So the colors that are in blues and purples on this map were areas that it was modeled to reach, and the areas in red were the locations where that storm surge did reach. Just using color and a great visual graphic to explain the map and the legend, I think you can see the pattern pretty well. This is a map of drunk driving across the United States and its relationship to intoxication. So to make this map, John again, IDD Solutions, mapped size, which corresponds to the number of deadly traffic accidents over 10 years, and color, which corresponds to the area's rate of incidents involving intoxication. So, larger sizes, darker colors mean that there are more traffic accidents that have intoxication involved in them. But the other thing that he did on this map was to help you really see the pattern better by creating a mesh of hexagons. And he was then able to symbolize the hexagon symbols instead of just the point locations where these things happen. So again, a different technique that involves the transformation of the information from one method or from one format to another and another scientific application in cartography. Just have a couple more examples for you. I'm going to switch now to some maps that were created by an artist, Aaron Colin, and his data came from the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, and he created a series of maps, altitude, based on the altitude of the flights, the model of the plane, and the manufacturer of the plane. But I'm going to focus on the altitude because he's using, again, this technique of simply changing the colors in a tint within one hue, which is, in this case, blue. And what you're seeing then is that lower elevation flights are whiter and higher elevation flights are darker. So this is the New England area, or the Northeast. This is the Southeast. Using just color to symbolize altitude, can you tell what city this is? San Francisco. How about this? San Diego's right here. Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. So it's a really excellent technique, just taking the flight lines and then applying symbology for the altitude. So the last example I want to show you is work in progress. For this set of maps, I'm working with a collaborator, another person that I collaborated with on the Atlas of Oregon. In fact, he was the lead cartographer, and I was telling you about him earlier. This is Stuart Allen. He is almost everybody I've shown you so far, the maps of, are award-winning cartographers. And he's an award-winning cartographer who was featured in a book called Virtuoso, and this book highlights the people who are at the pinnacle of their field. So folks like Baryshnikov. Well, Stuart Allen was chosen as the pinnacle person for cartography, and I'm hoping that you'll see why in this next couple of views of his maps. Now what we're doing in this, it's actually an atlas. It will be an online atlas. So while when we started it was in a print layout, you can see that there's print marginalia here. Ultimately it will go online. And what we're trying to do is to express the form of urban environments in the United States through the 4 primary driving factors that relate to the urban form, which you can see here, is built up areas. And for this, we're using data from the U.S. Geological Survey. That's the amount of impervious surface. So where it's darker, it's concrete. And where it's lighter, there's less concrete or other types of impervious surface. So can you tell which city we're looking at here? That's Los Angeles. Long Beach is right here, isn't it? No.
Yep.
Yeah, here. Long Beach is right here. And then we're also looking at population density. And this is a rather unique set of colors. By the way, it took him 4 years to choose the colors for this set of maps, because when he was thinking that it would be a print atlas, he thought all 4 had to work together, that you would have to see all 4 potentially at the same time on one page. So darker colors are higher densities, lighter colors are lower densities, but he really wanted to pull out some of those areas that were right nearest the high values, so he put them in a striking cyan to really make them stand out. And then another factor that shapes the urban environment is race and ethnicity. The challenge on this map is that you want to have every racial group potentially identified that's predominant within where census blocks on these maps. And if they're not predominant, then they aren't shown. But you also want to say, how predominant are they? So light green is predominantly white, but say only about 30 or 40%. Very dark green is predominantly white, but very high percentages, say 80 or 90% white. Same with the other race classes. And then finally, income. And again, a great choice of colors that are sort of above and below the mean, which is the national mean, and that's in the lighter colors. So blues are below the national mean, pinks are above the national mean, and again, areas that are really way out there in a different color altogether. So let's just take a quick look at the area that I was just pointing out to you, your area here. The challenge on this map is to know what not to put on it, because we need to give readers enough base information that they can find what they want to look for. And what is the first thing you look for on this map? Where you live, right? People want to be able to see that on maps. And so we need to give them enough information that they can actually find that. But every time we add something to the map, it takes away from their ability to see the pattern. So we have to be very, very careful on what we include and how we show it. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to talk to you about today. But I hope you can understand that there is just a lot that I couldn't even talk about. We didn't talk about animated maps. We didn't talk about 3D maps. We didn't talk about maps of interior spaces or interactive maps or web maps. We just didn't have time. So I'm kind of hoping that since I'm just up the road in Redlands, you'll invite me back and I can share some more with you. And for now, I'll just let you know that I'm, again, very pleased to have been able to come here, and I won't say goodbye because I'm just up there. Instead, I'll just say thank you for your attention.
Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here at this Aquarium. haven't been to an aquarium for a while. And it's actually some of the things in this aquarium, I see, they're mixing up art with science and technology. It's very interesting. It's very close to my own interests. I am primarily a scientist, and I've been working in the field of nanotechnology for some 24, something like that, years. And nanotechnology is typically about very small things, like maybe they're made up of 10 atoms width or so. It's kind of interesting, but it tends to be something that becomes very reductionist. So if you've been studying atoms, you get one atom in the end, and then you go, so what? It's kind of boring almost in a way to end up with one atom. So I started to study more atoms connected up together and work in biology using nanotechnology. And I'll talk about that a little bit, but not something scientific. Purely. And in the last probably 12 years, I became very interested in art science, the idea of kind of third culture that is different from the past, because in the past, in the distant past, art and science were not sort of separate as we imagine today. But I guess at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and things like that, there was a need to have science in a kind of separate way. Many scientists understand and work on specialist things, and artists were somehow separated from them. However, with the internet today and all the communication systems and the availability of scientific information everywhere on the net, that's changing. And I believe in science in particular, we can learn a lot from artists, particularly in complex situations. And this is probably the century of complexity. It's the most important thing in science, complexity of the century. So art has an important role to play. And likewise, for art itself, it's also provides something different, I guess. So we have at UCLA an art science center, and he does many things. It's directed as Victoria Besson, who's in the audience. And Victoria, in terms of environmentalism, is much better to talk about things about the environment than me. I'm afraid I am not very good at the environment in the sense that I kind of believe in complex situations, very complex phenomena can occur, and the more interconnections there are in a network, whether it be social networks or networks of industries and the environment working together, many unexpected things can happen. However, she has got a very interesting project which involves maps, right? And it's called Water Balls. So if you're interested in something more environmental from the Art Science Center, you should look at her work. And you can actually pick a body of water, I think, and associate yourself with it. So just very briefly advertising the Art Science Center. We also do a lot of different things. This is the project she's involved in, which is also mapping, which is working with a scientist, Chuck Taylor. And he's trying to understand how birds communicate with each other. And so they have a lot of listening devices and GPS, and then they map how, again, a complex situation of how birds communicate. And that's something we do. And we also have a school for high school kids, and I believe you have high school kids in here. We have high school kids, some 30 or 40 every year to do a a summer school where they learn about creativity, art, and science, and they actually work in the California Nanosystems Institute, and work with science, and they have to imagine the impossible. That's their end task. Imagine the impossible. So, I decided it was supposed to be storytelling, but maybe I got the communication wrong, so I'm going to tell you a story. And this story is basically about the emergence of a kind of art science piece. The emergence of, not really the creation, it was called Blue Morph. And Blue Morph is something that happened by accident to me. But you may know of Edward Lawrence. He was a mathematician, and he was into chaos theory, and he brought up the idea that a butterfly flapping its wings, in one part of the world could generate a storm in the other part of the world. I actually work in this kind of thing. I have a DARPA project at the moment, the Defense Advanced Research Planning Association, trying to make a machine that does this. But what it is self-organized criticality. So the idea of chaos and order, it's like a black and white thing, right? It's like good or bad. But in a system where we have noise, some kind of fluctuations, there is a state where things are neither totally chaotic or ordered. They're semi-ordered, they're dynamic, they're evolving in space and time. And that's basically the way most humans behave, actually, societies behave. Of course, we have controls, to stop people really being totally self-organized. We have, governments that make sure that we don't, become that way. It's not a bad state. Examples of the self-organized critical phenomena are earthquakes. So there are very few big earthquakes and lots of small ones. But they don't follow a kind of bell-shaped curve in distribution. The probability of a big earthquake is higher than you imagine, and the probability of these tiny ones is much higher than you would imagine from a normal statistical point of view. So Edward Lawrence was thinking about self-organized criticality. Now, I work in nanotechnology with a microscope that looks like a gramophone. It's actually a very small gramophone, and it has a tiny little tip, like atomically sharp, and I field surfaces, and I make pictures of them. So I make the topograph shoot column, right? In terms of the map making business. And it's been a friend of mine, Don Eigler, he's at IBM, he's quite famous for writing IBM anatoms. He's linked the processor, making these pictures to, like they called it, early cartographers. They were discovering, a new world, the world on a nanoscale. So I guess in 2004, I published a paper in Science. This is a picture of fielding yeast cells. This is a yeast cell. This is a bud where the yeast cells separate. And we found that the yeast cells were moving, vibrating. And we sonified them because Victoria couldn't understand data. It was like too complicated for her. She said, why don't you make a sound file out of it? So we did. And then Nature actually rejected it the first time, and then we said to Science, it's always the case. These are the two best journals that we end at the moment. Anyway, they wrote an article about the screaming cells. And then Smithsonian Magazine wrote about yeast cells moving. Okay? So that was good. And I have a secretary, and I don't answer the phone. It's a special feature I have. I just don't answer the phone. But one day she was out, and the phone rang, so I picked up the phone. And this is where the butterfly effect will come in. But, this, and nothing against the public, but, hello, I'm Ms. Costello from Florida. I read your article in the Smithsonian, and I was really, really inspired by it. And I collect the sound of insects. she collects all sorts of insects and she said, could you hear, using this technique, this gramophone-like technique, could you hear the sound of metamorphosis of a butterfly? So, you know, the butterfly with the caterpillar goes into the pupa. And then the pupa hangs there, and then out comes the butterfly. Could I hear it? And I was crazy. I said, well, I don't know. She said, would you please? And I said, well, if you send me some, I'll think about it. So she had a friend called Richard Stringer who actually has a butterfly farm, and he does it for weddings and things like that. They send them off in packets, and you can actually carry butterflies around in your pocket, and then we'll take them out and they. So he sent me some, and this one is a monarch butterfly. It's the colors of Halloween, and it flies from California to Mexico and places like that. And this is about a week. It goes through these stages of development, and you can see eventually the butterfly inside becomes transparent. But during that week, it undergoes this enormously painful, well, I'm saying painful, only because after the experiments I realized it sounds like it. Transformation, almost every cell in the body is transformed. And this is a bit of an overkill, but this is an 8 Tesla MRI, which at that time was a pretty strong MRI, like, 8 Tesla. And what you can see is we did some MRIs, and you can see here has the butterfly transforms. But the interesting thing is that it has 8 pumps, interconnected pumps, like 8 hearts. And I do yoga, so it reminded me of the 8 chakras. At least it could have been yoga with 8 chakras. And so I decided to do the experiment, and this is the experiment. I don't know why I did this experiment, because I wasn't getting funding for that. This woman kept phoning me up after that. And then the assistant, she left a message, and then she started sending me butterfly cards. She's a really nice person. So the butterfly farmer guy, who actually teaches in a college, small college in that area, I guess. So what we did was we took this butterfly, this chrysalis, we attached a small mirror. Can you see the small mirror there? It's a tiny mirror, so small you can hardly see it. And we shine a laser beam on it. And if the shell moves, the laser beam moves, and then we can detect the motion. And it's not very hot, by the way. This is the old technique where you blow cigarette smoke over it. It looks like some science fiction. So here's the results. And indeed, it was moving. Very low frequency, like half a hertz. And as we followed it through its stages of development, this is time, and this is moving, right? It's kind of moving about 100 or so nanometers up and down, but you don't know what an nanometer is, so it's very small. And this is over periods of time. So early on in the week, it's like a fridge. This is the frequency, and it's going on, and then it goes off, and it's on, off. So it's going on and off the pumps. And that's because the pumps are giving it energy to transform it into the butterfly. But if it put the pumps on all the time, I guess it run out of juice, because there's no food, right? That it can take, sort of. And this is just before emergence. But it turns out, only know this later, that this is a self-organized phenomenon. And so Richard Stringer, the butterfly guy, says, I've got some blue morphos. Do you want to look at those? And I said, sure. So I read about the blue morpho, and again, no funding, I just became fascinated with this idea. And I took it up to Oregon, to FEI. I did a postdoc in Oregon State, by the way, 100 years ago. But Up in Oregon, it's a company called FEI, and the CEO of it, Don King, is a good friend of mine. He said, anytime you want to use eye microscopes, I have very good people, we can. So we took the wing up there and looked at under the electron microscope, and it's full of nanotechnology. This is the most amazing piece of nanotechnology, this blue morpho. You know, it's okay to move? Yeah. I just don't know your field of view. So if you look at the wing under a regular microscope, it's blue, but this is an electron microscope now. It doesn't have color. And it's made up of these flattened scales. And if you look into the flattened scales more and more and more, you eventually come down to the nanoscale and you see these structures. This is, you know, like something like 100 nanometers or so. This is much smaller than the wavelength of light. And the reason the butterfly is blue, iridescent blue, is because the light that comes in is manipulated by this nanostructure, which is black actually, it's black protein, and it comes off as this beautiful iridescent blue. So, you know, I of course went to Victoria, the artist, and said, well, you know, I've been doing this now, what do you think? And she goes, butterflies are difficult. And it looks like some, you know, craft shop, okay? You know, walking out, there's a nice blue butterfly t-shirt and stuff. Okay. Anyway, we pecked at it, and now I'll tell you what happened. So the first time we tried it, I tried to use the concept of the nanophotonic structure of the wing and projections, and we produced something like this and went to Seville. And I thought, it's okay, right? It wasn't the most exciting thing to see. And then we tried, we did it in Prague, and then we did an exhibition in Los Angeles. Every time it was a bit different. And this one is a kind of blue thing, which is the 8 hearts, and it pulsates and stuff like that. It's the blue butterfly. But this monk appeared. Which changed the rhythm. So the phone call was causing some reorganization or whatever. But he appeared like this, you know. And things changed. And this has happened in the past because we had a LACMA. We had a giant exhibit called Nano, and I got until...
You're fine. About 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah, I could talk all day, that's probably not. But, so, this is an exhibition called Nano, and it was all about nanotechnology. And then suddenly these Tibetan monks appeared, and they were doing a mandala, and so we ended up actually working with the monks. So they made this giant mandala, and in the very center of it, we started to take, you know, images and going down to the nanoscale, and we became great friends. But whenever the monks appear, something happens. And once, I think the last 2 days of the exhibit, right? So the monks did their thing. They had smashed the mandala and thrown it into the Santa Monica. You know, there's a special ceremony when you get rid of the mandala. So we had to do the same on that. We had to keep it there. Another bunch of monks came in. That was the, where were they from? Nepalese monks. So when monks appear, you know something's going to happen. And sure enough, it got worse. So the next thing was extraterrestrial vibrations at the integratron. So we had, does anybody know this place? This is for real, you're really out there, you know. So this is a place that exists, the Joshua Tree, and this is a thing right here that's supposed to be for generating electricity, and this is a giant loudspeaker, and the idea was that people would walk in one side and the sound vibrations would heal them if they walk out the other side. It was never actually, it never actually ran. So they're looking for money. If anybody has a lot of money, we would like to, you know, get it cranked up. And since I do Kundalini yoga, we were trying to figure out, yeah, I remember now. So we were trying out what to do in this exhibit, right? And we knew we could use blue lights and we would project these microscopic images of the butterfly. And since we do Kundalini yoga, we thought it would be nice if the person sits and kind of meditates in the space. And Victoria had got this piece of fabric, really tall tube. And the idea is we were going to use the pupa. We were going to make a model of the pupa that would hang above the person and symbolize actually change. The piece is all about change, imagining change. But because I'm stupid, I was sitting there and I took the model and I stuck it in my head and I said, look, I'm a yogi. So we changed it essentially. This is the honest truth. This is self-organization that happens. This piece of art generated itself. So we generated this giant hat that was 26 foot high. And now you would think that anybody, self-respecting person would look at this and go, this is nuts. And the first, we had it 3 times in Joshua Tree this place. The first time, all these people appeared from everywhere. There was one guy from San Francisco who was he was a kung fu guy. So he worked with Bruce Lee or something. Yeah, and he'd murdered people. And he sat on it and there's a ley line through it. So, and Victoria said, meditate on change. And one guy was a real grumpy kind of curmudgeon like he or something. I've been waiting an hour. So we started at 7:30. And Victoria said, have your money back. And he went, no. And wait. And he got on it. And then he got up and he started to cry. And he said, thank you. This has changed my life. It's almost. So I thought this is an art science piece, but it turned out to be more like this ephemeral, spiritual, very much connecting to the different complex connections. Here's another guy. This is another place, I think this is Norway, because we started changing the hat based on the location. The Integratron. And the weird thing with the Integratron was, if you've been out in the desert, the big rock? And the Indians said when the rock cracks, it determines something about the future, and it did crack, but it was cracked in a good way. And under the rock was this nutcase, Krutzers, way back. I don't know what date, would it be the 40s. He lived under the rock. It's an interesting kind of, but I guess it's nice and cool under there. And then this other guy called Von Kessel, he was under the rock. And what happened was an alien spaceship landed and took him off and told him to build the Integratron. And this started the whole, the
Howard Hughes funded it.
Howard Hughes funded it, of course. We're not supposed to say that. This started this whole thing with the extraterrestrials. Okay? And all these conventions are held out there in that area. So somehow, maybe the extraterrestrials were in control of this piece of art science. Anyway, next is the Santanese, there you go. It now it evolved into had this other web-like structure on it. There we go. And then this is in Denmark. It adopted another form, but still people were going crazy, queuing up. The third time we had it in the Integratron, we had to turn people away. There were so many people and they wouldn't get off the exhibit. This is we had it in Trondheim, we had it in Shanghai. Where's that?
RPI,
Resnar Polytechnic. We had it in Brazil at FAT, which is a really expensive museum. And the great thing about FAT is they spent a lot of money on having it with the blue morphics, the other pieces we did. And there was this bus tour. This bus tour arrived with these very old people, and they had 2 shows on. One was ancient Egyptian golden things, and so they came, these people, and said, "Oh, you're here to see the ancient Egyptian things." No, we're here to see the blue dwarf. And now. And that was that. You see, through there is the bit of the Egyptian stuff. And this is architecture we actually created for us. So that's it. And of course, Victoria's, got more to do with the work than me, but nevertheless. Okay, this was Polytechnic and running. Anyway, everywhere we go, we get great reception. This is that George?
Yes,
George
Croatia.
Croatia. He's a book publisher, and he also is an expert in Tibetan, the Tibetan type of religion, and he really loved this piece. So, and then we had it in Florence, and so what happened basically, and I'm trying to explain to you this thing, the butterfly effect is an effect where, due to some initial set conditions mathematically, you can just put something tiny into it and generate a large effect. There's also a thing called the sand pile model. It doesn't work with sand, but it works with long grain rice. If you take long grain rice and you drop it on the ground, it will form a funnel, right? Like this. And then as you put rice in, at some point, the rice will go in an avalanche. And you cannot predict this small avalanche or large avalanche. When I analyzed later the data from the blue morph transforming, there are special ways you can analyze it. Its transformation is a bit like that. These bursts, you don't know when it's suddenly going to explode. And this is what happened to me with this phone call. Because if it wasn't for this phone call, this would never have happened in the first place. So it's, and of course the initial conditions are I have art, science, working with Victoria at UCLA and so on. Anyway, it keeps going. Now here comes the last part of the story, because I guess we should finish in, what, 5 minutes?
5 to 7, please.
5 to 10, okay. So, my father was Polish, and I am Scottish, but he came from Poland to Britain after the war. And I never really went to Poland much, very rarely. But I was invited because in Gdansk, they have art science type activity, but they had no money, and they said, Victoria and I went and gave talks, and this lady, Kasia, she was working on the art science thing. She said, would you do an exhibit here? And they have an exhibition place called Lasnia, I think it's called the place. And I said, no, I want to do it in a Roman Catholic church. Because, I don't want to get religious here, but the idea of this piece is it's transforming. And the idea to have it, just in a gallery doesn't appeal to me so much. And they said, well, there's this church, St. John's Cathedral, but it's completely falling apart. And we're trying to get some money to make an art center. And I said, well, is the priest okay about it? He said, we have to talk to the priest. And I said, well, tell him I want to do it here. And I think it will transform things. So this is the cathedral, and it's kind of falling apart, and it had bullet holes and all sorts of things in it like this. And so that was in 2008. And I really had an intent that this could change and help, it was like me, something to do with some kind of polish in me or something, I don't know. But attraction, or blue morphness and the attraction. So then in 2011, they had converted this, it was still a cathedral, Roman Catholic cathedral, but it was also a place for rock concerts, for multi-use. Beautiful. And look, you can see all this stuff. This is for hanging the lights and speakers too. And so we set the Blue Morph up in 2011. And this is Richard, who is actually one of the directors of the place sitting there. And the poles were very interesting. It's very interesting. If you go to California, you know, they run with this, right? In Poland, they would turn around, typically he's facing the front, but a lot of Poles would face that, they wouldn't be part of the, you know, the people that were around them. Kind of interesting development. Anyway, these are some of the places. The next one, because Marseille is this year's City of Culture, Victoria is going to set it up in the former zoological museum. So it's going to run in Marseille. It'll be interesting to see how the Marseillaise people take it on. Just say a few thanks towards the end here. Various people. Now, where is the very important one? The Vermont Foundation, which is Saint-Ignace. They, unfortunately, the lady who actually run that, they never shook it round, died, who was a friend of Victoria's. But they have consistently supported the work, her work. And if you want to find more out, don't forget to look at artscience.ucla.edu. And that's it. I have a short movie, but we don't need to have it.